In this video, we'll be taking a look at different ways to create details within Revit. As you can see, I have created 4 walls, and if we look at the type, it's an exterior brick and CMU on metal stud wall. We'll take a look at creating a detail in this corner. A detail in Revit is a 2-dimensional drawing that is view specific. So the items that we place on that detail will not be a model or will not show up in other views other than the detail view. Let's get started. We'll go ahead and take a look at this corner here. To create a detail, we can go to our View tab and we can create a detail either by a callout or a section. And the difference is a callout would be in the same plane as the drawing. So we would see a detail or a blow up of this corner. If we were to do a detail from the section, we would cut the wall and look at it vertically. Let's start with the callout. You can create a callout by a rectangle, or you can sketch any shape that you want. We'll start with a rectangle. If you pick the rectangle tool for your callout, you can left click, drag, and left click again. And when I left click again, you'll see over in the project browser that we now have a new view, level 1 callout. The extents of this callout equal the extents of this boundary. If I highlight that boundary, I can move the tag, the callout tag, to wherever I wish. If I double click on this, it will take me to the view. I'm going to type WT so we can tile the windows so we can take a look at what's happening to the model over on the right versus what's happening to the detail call out on the left. You can see if I highlight the crop region on the detail callout and extend it, it extends over in the model view. Likewise, if I shrink it here, it reduces the view over here. And I can edit this crop region. When I select that tool, I go into sketch mode, and now I can create these shapes if it was more advantageous to show something in my model with that type of shape of callout. And you can see that it matches over in the model view as well as in the detail callout. I'm going to back up and keep it as a rectangle for now. The other type of detail that we can create is by a section. In the View tab, we can see that our section tool is located here. When we select Section, you can go to the Properties dialog box over here and select the drop-down menu. And you can choose between a building section, a wall section, or a detail. We'll select Detail. If we left click, drag, and left click, we get a detail callout. If you select this detail, you can see how far the view depth is with the green dashed line. This is cutting through the wall, and the view will be looking up. If we double click on the bubble, we can see this is what we're looking at. I'm going to go ahead and change the detail level and the scale. And if I don't crop the view, you can see that it is actually at the base of the wall. And you can see that we're looking at a vertical cut through that wall. Let's take a look at how we might modify this detail callout. Again, these tools are view specific. I'll keep the model open here on the right hand side so you can see that when we add things to this view, they will not show up on the model view or any other view. Let's begin with crop regions. The crop region is this border here, and you can change it with these grips. But the dashed line is an annotation crop region. I'm going to create some text to illustrate this point. This might be an air cavity. And when I click to finish the text note, it disappears. If I highlight the border of the crop region, I can pull the grip of the annotation border and it shows up again. Again, if that dashed border, the annotation crop region, covers any part of the text, it disappears. But if it's totally within the border, the text will show. This allows the model to be cropped closer than the text, which will give you an area around the model to write your text notes. The next tool that we'll look at in creating or modifying the details is filled regions. On the Annotate tab, on the Detail panel, we can find the Region tool. If we select the drop-down menu, we can see that it's either a filled region or a masking region. The filled region is just a fill pattern. And you can select the fill pattern from the Properties palette over here. If you look at the drop-down menu, you can see the patterns that come by default. You can create your own, and we'll look at that at a later time. The next thing to do is to draw the boundary that we want this fill pattern to be. Let's take, for example, if we wanted to show a gray screen on the interior of this wall, we could create a light gray solid pattern. Right now we have entered sketch mode for the region. Let's start over so we can see that again. We're going to select the filled region. We're in sketch mode, so now we can draw the boundary. And I'm just going to draw one from the inside corner here, and I'm going to extend it past the crop region. I'm also going to change the filled region pattern here. I'm going to edit the type, and I'm going to find a solid black, and I'm going to duplicate that and create a solid gray. To change that to a solid gray, all I need to do is change the color. Hit OK. And then when I finish sketch mode, you can see that the interior of that wall is now gray, and it is cropped to the crop region. The next tool we'll take a look at is the masking region. It is very similar to the filled region, but it is the masking region, and its purpose is to mask parts of the model. You can select the boundary lines, the boundary line type, thin, wide, even invisible if you don't want to see them. And then you can block out portions of the model, like so. That's masking region. Now we can take a look at some detail components that we can add to this detail to make it more legible and informative. One thing we might need to add is insulation. Again, up here on the Annotate tab, on the Detail panel, we can find the Insulation tool. If we select Insulation, we can select from up here how wide to make the insulation pattern, and if we want to offset it or create a chain out of it. We'll go ahead and zoom into this wall. We'll change this width to 4.5. And as I get close to this wall, it'll find center lines of either the materials or the core or the entire wall that it can snap to. This is nice because when I left click and slide my mouse and left click again, I can get a little lock here. And if I lock it, now, as you can see in the model, the insulation did not show up. Again, this is a view-specific two-dimensional tool. However, because I locked it to the three-dimensional wall, if this wall happens to move, that insulation will go with it. Now, I didn't lock my solid pattern, but we can do that, just like that. And now, if that wall moves anywhere, both of those follow. another detail component. And again, when we load components or use components for details, which are two-dimensional and view-specific, we want to go to the Annotate tab, the Detail panel, and find the component here. This is different than going to the Architecture tab and loading components from the Build panel here. These are the models, three-dimensional objects. From the Annotation, when we go to Component here, when we want to load a family, because we don't have a detail component that we want to use, the folder that we want to load detail components from is the Detail Items folder of the Imperial, US Imperial folder. This is important. If you're loading certain things, you might want to go to the other folders that you might think the object would be found in. But all of the other folders contain three-dimensional objects. Again, we want two-dimensional objects from the Detail Items. If we go here and we go to the General folder at the top, we can find another component that's very useful, a break line. When we hit Open, it will load into this file. And if we use the break line, we can see what it does. A break line, which is this symbol here, represents that whatever object it is next to actually continues on. This way people know that this wall, for instance, is not stopping right here, but it actually continues on. The nice thing about this break line tool is it comes with a little masking region on one side. So you can push that masking region past the crop region to make your detail look correct. Again, notice that the break line did not show up in the model over here. Let's look at one more detail component. By default, it is loaded, and this is an I-beam. It's actually called a W shape or W flange. And in this detail, we might have a steel column in the corner. Once again, we place it here, but it didn't show up here. This is a decision the user, you, will have to decide if you want to model these I-beams in the model and make them three-dimensional, or if a two-dimensional representation will suffice. In this case, we'll stay with the two-dimensional representation. I'm going to go ahead and add grids, because grids will usually fall along the intersection of the steel columns. And you can see a grid is not two-dimensional. It actually showed up here in the view of the model. We'll create another one going the other direction. Once we have things like the column and insulation, I'm going to go ahead and put insulation going in the other direction as well. Unlock it. And this is a good example of the insulation is actually above the break line masking tool. So we can highlight that masking tool and come up here and bring it to the front on the Arrange panel. And when we do that, we brought the masking tool to the very top, if you will, of this drawing, so it hides everything underneath it. The last thing we'll take a look at, as far as detail components go, is a repeating detail. We go to Component, if we go to the Annotate tab, Detail panel, Component, and we go to the drop-down menu, we can find Repeating Detail Component. When we select that, we can see that it is, by default, brick. If we click and drag, we can see that the brick repeats itself. For instance, if we had a window and we wanted a brick sill, but we didn't want to model it, we could place this right against the existing brick. It would actually be right there. And that's an easy way to make a repeating detail. We can highlight this, edit the type, duplicate it, and let's use the W flange post, steel column, that we had before in a new repeating detail family. So we'll call this W flange. And in the type properties, you can see that the detail to be used is selected here. You get to choose from all the detail components that are already loaded into the project. You can see that our W shape, or our W flange, is right here. And we might want to change the distance or the spacing between each one to say 14 inches. We hit OK. We can go back to our detail. Well, we can see that the one that we had selected had already changed to this. Let's highlight this. If we edit the type, we can see that we want to rotate this detail so they don't line up end to end, but side to side. So we can pick from here and say 90 degrees and hit OK. And now we have a W flange repeating detail. If I select that, CS is create similar, and now I can just draw quickly lots of these I-beams in the detail. We can add things like dimensions to this detail, and again, they're view specific. And more text. This might say steel column per structural. And that's how you can start to create details with lots of information. There's another type of detail that we can create, and this is called a drafting view. On the View tab, we can go to the Create panel and create a drafting view. A drafting view is basically a blank piece of paper. We can put anything on it, any drawing of two-dimensional components or objects. We can import AutoCAD details and place them on this paper. We can put text. We can put JPEGs. And then we can actually reference that drafting view from the model from a callout. Let's take a look. I'll give two examples. The first one we'll just call Happy Face. And this is to illustrate that you can put anything on these blank pieces of paper. So I'm just going to use two-dimensional drafting lines and draw a happy face. And we can use that as a detail. To further illustrate this, I'm going to create a sheet and place some of our drawings on this sheet. So there's our level 1. I'm going to go ahead and shrink this crop region down a little bit so we can fit everything onto the sheet. We'll put it over in the corner, and just to tidy things up, we'll put the title bar below it. We can bring that down there. And now we can bring our detail that we were working on earlier right next to it. And the nice thing you can see is once I place this detail on a sheet, it fills in the bubble on where you can find it. This bubble is saying you can find the blow up of this image on sheet A101 detail 2. And sure enough, here's A101 and here's detail 2. And Revit does that automatically. If we look over at our project browser, we can see that our newly created Happy Face drafting view is located over here. And we can also bring this onto the sheet. It's a little big. Let's change the scale. Maybe even a little bit less. But nowhere in our three-dimensional model, our floor plan view, do we have a call out saying to look for this happy face. Let's create one. If I hover over this view, I can right click and select Activate View. And now I can modify the actual model or this view while I'm still looking at the border. I'll go ahead and do a call out. And before I place this call out wherever I need to, I'm going to reference another view. And that's up here at the top. When I select this box, I can now select which view I want to reference. I'll reference the happy face. And we'll put it in this corner. And you can see, as I did that, it filled in detail 3 on sheet A101. And here's A101, and here's detail 3. So people looking at this drawing will know to look at this corner to know how it is constructed. They'll go to detail 3 on sheet A101 and see a happy face. Let's take a look at one more example, a more realistic example. If we go to View, Drafting View, and we'll name this brick wall. Here we are. This is a blank piece of paper, and we can go ahead and insert an image. I downloaded an image off the internet earlier of a brick wall detail. I'm going to close out of that detail and go back to my sheet. And now I can create a view. I'm going to activate this viewport. And now I can create a view, a section, detail, and I can reference another view. And I'll select the brick wall this time, create my detail callout, and you can see that this view, this section cut, is telling people to look at detail 4 on sheet A101, which is this JPEG. The last thing we'll take a look at is modifying detail lines. If I go up to the detail that I created earlier, right click, activate view, if I type in DL, I can now draw a two-dimensional detail line. And up here, under the Modify Place Detail Line tab, I get different options of shapes to draw the lines and different line styles to draw the lines with. If I look at the different line styles, by default, these are the ones that Revit comes with. And I can draw a detail line that's a wide line. To create your own detail line style, you go to the Manage tab, Additional Settings tool, which is found on the Settings panel. And when you look down here, you can see that there are different options to create different line styles. One is the line style tool itself. Then you have line weights and line patterns. A line style is a combination of a line weight, a line pattern, and a line color. Quickly, if we look at the line weights, this shows you how thick the different line weights 1 through 16 will be printed at what scale. I recommend not changing this. 16 line weights are plenty, and by default Revit has done a pretty good job of creating the line weights. If you need something to be a little thicker, it's best to change the object line weight number, not the actual thickness that it is being printed. So again, I suggest not modifying this dialog box at all. Back to additional settings, line patterns. There are lots here. You can create your own, but I've never had to. I've used these and they've sufficed. Now let's take a look at line styles. This is where we can create our own line types or line styles. When we open up that drop down or that dialog box, we'd want to open up the drop down of line styles. And these are the same lines that we just saw earlier when we invoked the detail line tool. Let's say we want a wide line, but that's red. Well, we can create a new line type and we'll call it wide red. And again, that was by modifying the subcategories and picking new. That is how we created that. We might want to rename that just because that E is bothersome. Oops. Oops, I accidentally got rid of it. Let's try again. New line subcategory, wide red line. There it is. So we'll want to make it thick. You can see that the wide line that I created earlier was a thickness of 5. Then we can make this one a 7. And we want to change the color to red. And hit OK and hit OK. Now that we've created it, we can go back to our detail or even on our model, draw a detailed line. And now that wide red line that we just created shows up on the drop-down menu. And when we draw, we see the big wide red line. And that is how you modify line styles.